to an important conversation that I call, if not now, when? If not now, when are we going to address the importance of helping our executives feel healed and supported so that they create a rite of passage for everybody under their leadership to thrive? We know from life's reality, healed people heal others, broken people break others. And as leaders in politics, in non-for-profit, and in business, how are we creating a space at the top so that the executives can truly lean in and feel supported? Because we know it's lonely at the top. Everybody expects the person at the top to have all the answers, and that loneliness comes at a price. And how do we create that inclusive, supported environment for those at the top so that they can create an environment where everybody within their organization, their community, their society, their country feels supported? And that is the question we're trying to answer through the conversation of, if not now, when are we going to make this happen? And then from there, go into what are the things we can do to make that a reality? And to have this mission critical conversation that shapes the path for organizations and societies is a very, very dear friend, somebody I look up to, somebody I respect, and somebody who is an experienced executive coach all the way from New Zealand. Sally Anderson, welcome to have this conversation with me. It is such an honor.
Absolute privilege to be here today and dance in this conversation, which I think is critically important.
Thank you, Sally. So as we get started, let's ask the million-dollar question. How do we create the environment for those at the top not to feel lonely and to feel supported? Because our ability to create that is going to determine the fertile ground that organization or that society is for everybody within it to thrive. So as you work with executives and as you work with leaders in military and governments, how are you seeing things transpire and how are you guiding them to create that supportive space?
Oh, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Okay, here goes. So that taboo subject called mental health is hard enough at the employee level. You know, a lot of companies, with no disrespect in making this statement, it's kind of like ISO 9000 or, you know, that kind of like quality assurance thing. It's something that we've got to deal with. We don't have the budget for it. We don't really understand it, but they're now telling us that we have to deal with mental health in the workplace. And it's like become kind of like a compliance thing, like a tick box. Nobody that I've heard of, and I've been in the trenches for 30 years in leadership, talks about mental health at the most senior level. Now, I'm going to rattle off some statistics shortly, just for the linear listener on your call today. They did a survey on LinkedIn of about a cross-section of 700 to 1,000 executives post-COVID of all of the dynamics of what it is that they're experiencing. And as I rattle off all these statistics, I wanted to have a conversation about it, because it's all very well to rattle off statistics and do surveys and all that sort of thing. Now, what are you going to do with it? You know, and when you listen to some of these statistics, it is mind-blowing. So pre-COVID, I use a model called the three-legged stool. First leg of the stool is traditional leadership. Most leaders are unconsciously competent in their traditional leadership. Unconsciously competent. You're 15, you get in the car, it's all a bit clunky, you're unconsciously incompetent. You get in your car now, you don't even think about it, you're unconsciously competent. So in that first leg of the stool, traditional leadership, that's solid as. Second leg of the stool is subject matter expertise. Most leaders have some form of specialization. That leg of the stool is very, very solid. They're unconsciously competent in their subject matter expertise. Third leg of the stool, however, is the so-called soft skills. Whoever said they were soft, I find it quite funny now. They talk about, compassion and empathy. These are not new concepts, people. The fact that it's just got more airtime and people are more palatable around them, all good. So third leg of the stool is more behavioral change, more the inner work. And in the past, pre-COVID, it was when I've got the time, when I've got the budget, which is hardly ever, and can you just come in and fix my people? But God's sake, don't look at me, right? Now, post-COVID, as much as there's been a viral pandemic, there's actually a fear pandemic. It's actually forced people to associate. And we have a lot of high-level leaders who haven't done what I term the inner work. We have a lot of little boys, little girls running businesses, societies, governments, countries, yeah? Because, novel concept, every single organization on the planet has human beings in it. Hello? And,
The Martians
that
haven't come yet, so we're all we have.
and then the whole concept of healing. There ain't one leadership development program on the planet that I know of where healing is an integral aspect of that leadership development program. And there's no transparency with reference to what these leaders are dealing with. So it's kind of like suck it up and just move on. So I might just segue into some of these statistics. And you being as academic as you are, because 30, I think you'll be quite interested in these. I thought they were mind-blowing. So 700 to 1,000 CEOs, and then Forbes got a hold of it and then it went viral. But I can guarantee nothing's been done about it. So 67%, this is post-COVID, 67% said it was the most challenging time of their career. 32% had said that they had to be facing making their people redundant. 42% had to introduce pay cuts. 62% they had to put off staff or furlough. 72% actually had no idea how to answer the plethora of questions that they were receiving, but because they were the leader, they were expected to know the answers. 52%, how's this? Were doubting their ability. 74% had to put on a face and just look cheerful. 58% found the whole virtual environment challenging. 58%. 56% felt that it harmed their mental health. Okay, goodo. If that's the case, were they given the support? I think not. 32% said that they couldn't switch off because it was just all consuming. 41% had higher stress levels, unprecedented that they'd ever experienced before. 39% said that they had to introduce more flexible hours, otherwise, staff were going to leave. 32% had to implement more diversity within their culture. 64% said that they had to become far more fairer and far more equitable. Why you wouldn't want to do that anyway, but anyway. 60% had to restructure. 74% had to really question their leadership style. When I Google healing on the internet and for leadership, it only talks about servant leadership. Come on. 67% said that it will have a lasting impact and they don't know whether they'll survive it. 44% said that they had to introduce soft skills. Most didn't know how to implement soft skills. 25% solicited management consultants and coaches. 69%, which is a positive, said that they had closer relationships with their people within the culture. 74% said that they were forced into greater transparency. 45% said that they had to become far more communicative in their leadership style. And last but not least, which I thought was really interesting, is that they had to become 72% said that they had to become kinder. Why on earth wouldn't you be kind anyway? But, all as a result of, this post-COVID environment. My difficulty is it's all very well to raise something. It's all very well for us to discuss this topic today. My thing is, it's kind of like, when you keynote or when you're in front of an audience, most individual people don't feel as though that they can actually make a change, which is why I stopped keynoting, because I was so frustrated that I just don't want to be a motivational speaker or inspiration. I want, things to change. And good old, what was the quote? Let's grab it for you. Our friend Einstein, we cannot solve new world problems from the same thinking. So now
Absolutely.
we're more adaptable to new leadership modalities. I mean, I've been banging the tambourine for 21 years on co-creative leadership, autonomous leadership. Who you are in your human form is limited. Who you are in your co-creative form is limitless. So I feel as though I'm more palatable now because traditional leadership as we know it is dead. We will not be returning to what was. And so there's more openness to different modalities of leadership, which are more humanistic in nature. And I look forward to delving into conversation today about what some of the solutions are, because we can't continue as we were, because most leaders are used to being in control and they have no idea how to navigate uncertainty.
So it's interesting, the data and the way people are used to talking about leadership, right? Leadership and control is command and control hierarchical model. And it's technically not leadership, it is being boss, right? It's positional power, not influence power. The minute we remove people from the seats in an office, I go back to my personal experience. My first job in the United States was with AT&T. And here I was as the head of finance and business operations. We were sitting at a budget meeting, actually within my first 2 weeks. And everybody looked at me and said, Cass, how are we going to get more bodies in? And I looked at them and I said, bodies? What do you mean by bodies? I knew what they meant, but I was going to play off on the fact that I'm a foreigner and I don't understand your American euphemism of bodies. And then they laughed and said, oh, you're not from here, bodies. We need people, butts on seats. I said, oh, interesting. So when you have bodies in seats, do you care if it has a heart to care about the business? Do you care if it has a mind to innovate and solve our problems? Do you care if it has the wherewithal to collaborate and work with each other so that the processes in a contiguous process is not broken and the voice of the customer is upheld? If we want all of that, we need more than bodies. But if you want bodies, I'm sure we can get some at the morgue. Right? I intentionally did that. And then we went into a conversation of how we refer to people behind closed doors is our culture. And now that's how we're going to treat them when we go out. So can we come to an agreement that we don't treat our people as bodies and therefore we don't refer to them as bodies, because language is culture. Okay, so I'm one of those people who has always had the privilege of being at the top of the financial hierarchy as a CFO, having become a CFO at 32. So that gave me the platform to say, this is not how I'm going to work. Normally, finance people are the first to refer to people as bodies. They're just numbers. I want my stats. I was in a position where I could break all of that. But coming with that is the responsibility of then working with the rest of the leadership to model that behavior on how to do it differently. And so I got to teach my peers how to lead by influence, because I was 32. I had men who were 45, 50 working for me. I was in a man's world in international corporate finance. And they all were taking bets on how quickly they can get me out because they didn't want a young foreign woman in that seat. Okay. So helping them become better than what they were and pivoting us to the modern era and leading through influence was the way I was able to shape that. And when 9/11 happened, we were able to deal with it because the traditional hierarchy couldn't deal with post 9/11 issues. When we lost our East Coast operation, we lost our entire global leadership. We lost people and we still had to run a business. So nothing like a crisis to create that come to Jesus mentality that sometimes people need to shock their system. And COVID is one of those come to Jesus moments, right? In the Western vernacular. And so how do we take the statistics and make it real? And going to a consulting firm is not going to solve the problem because the consulting firms are also running their businesses as if they want bodies to take care of clients. So the solution is not going to come from the group of people who created this command and control structure. And the younger millennials and the Gen Zs are not going to tolerate it.
No, not at all. Well, it's interesting you raised 9/11. So I was in New York on September the 10th, not realizing what was going to happen on September the 11th. So I was in charge of a global restructure program, 3,000 projects at the height of the assignment. I was based in Netherlands, Boston, and New York. Loved what I did corporately, cultural change, program portfolio, program directorship, semi into disaster area, all sorted out. Loved it. But millions of dollars would be spent on these change programs that I would implement, knowing that they would never get a return on their investment 3 to 5 years walking out the door. So I felt like a prostitute, excuse the expression, in the system. Because to me, even to this day, the amount of money that is spent by organizations on management consultants, on coaches, on cultural change initiatives for very questionable ROI back into the business still happens. And so, of all of the coaches on the planet, my key point of difference, and no other coach is dealing with it, which is quite frightening, is if you're going to invest money into change, let's make sure it's sustainable. So, outside of the topic that we're talking about today, with reference to where healing sits in the context of senior leadership, there's also the context of sustainability. And there was another quote that I really loved that I'll quote today. The ultimate measurement of effectiveness as leaders is the ability to sustain superior results over time. For this to occur, traditional leadership mindset has no choice but to adapt. So circumstance is what's creating people being more palatable and being more open to new approaches. It's a bit like I did 20 years standing for eradicating teen suicide globally. We can rattle off teen statistics of teen suicide. Our kids are dying and it's not okay. Don't even get me on that soapbox. So there's a disassociation when we rattle off statistics. And I'm not in any way, shape, or form discrediting the great work that is being done for a cross-section of initiatives. What we're focusing on today is what it's going to take to bridge that gap. And sad that it takes something of a horrendous nature to wake people up, to actually care, to actually think that there could be another way. I find it ironic that in most organizations, they're all about the bottom line, the bottom line, the bottom line. Well, if we've got human beings in every single organization on the planet and you're not focusing on their well-being and their ability to be able to perform specifically post-COVID, then obviously that's going to have an impact on your bottom line. So there's really a disassociation with reference to what this thing called mental health is, what this thing called healing is. What is healing? I'd like to come up with a different word because there's like you got to be broken or damaged or traumatized if you adopt healing. I don't care how great your childhood was. At the end of the day, nobody's devoid of healing, and yet there, as I said before, there's no leadership development plan in any organization that I know of on the planet that mandates the need for healing. Even coaching, heaven help us, some organizations are adverse to hiring coaches. So the 9/11 situation, the COVID situation, interesting that even after 9/11, given that had a global impact on the economy, that nothing really systemically changed. This is a really off the wall conversation, but I'm going to mention it because it's coming through. I believe because of my own experiences that I'm here to play some systemic change with the heinous crimes that occur in silence, the likes of pedophilia, child trafficking, baby bashing, baby killing. All of that lies in the silence, and we allow it as a society. It's abhorrent. So, the day that we no longer tolerate that as a society, but that silence, I also think, the silence of the stigmatization, the taboo within that, within the most senior level of not talking about even just two simple things, addictions, because that was escalated over COVID, and also the inner critic. I watched a fantastic documentary the other weekend on Marty Fritz, I think his name is, Untold Story. And he was the guy that basically brought mental health to the forefront of elite tennis. And I watched the interview with each of these elite tennis players about their journey, about when they were facing adversity or when they were facing circumstances that weren't part of their training. They spend so much money on all these coaches, and yet not one of those elite athletes were able to sustain their state in the face of what was occurring, which blew my mind, considering the amount of money that they invest into coaches and so forth. So part of the area that I specialize in what I term the default level of identity, and the ability to sustain change, that if you're going to invest money to change, let's make sure we can sustain it. So these budgets that all these organizations have, and where, I mean, don't get me wrong, I mean, if you're a leader of organization, it's difficult to manage where that money is going to be distributed, and you're answerable to boards. So something like healing ain't going to get some airtime until something really drastically happens to the CEO of the organization or whatever. What I'm
And then
interested
it's too
in,
late though. And then
that's
it's too
exactly
late.
right. That's exactly right. And to me, today's conversation is around what is going to have healing, or whatever, however you want to view it, as critical as anything else that's important from a leadership development standpoint, because it all has a direct correlation to the bottom line.
Absolutely. And as you are sharing your thoughts and your approach, what's coming up for me, Sally, is as businesses and as organizations, everybody is focusing on a coach to improve the doing. Nobody is investing or thinking about developing the being.
Yeah. Yeah.
And all the doing is not going to change the foundation of the being. And the being is what is doing all the doing, right? And therefore, if the mind, the psychological framework, the spiritual framework, and a level of awareness and mindfulness is not altered, all the doing is cosmetic. Changing the ingredients doesn't make a better cake. If the person making the cake is not putting love into it, right? Two people can follow the same recipe, but the person who cooked with love, the food is tastier. There's a reason for that.
So why on earth, I find this amazing. Faith and love are the two most important areas of a human being's life. Every single organization on the planet um, is part of the cultural aspect of the business. And yet we do not, I have never seen it myself, have love and faith at the forefront of leadership. So I said before, you know, who we are in our human form is limited, who we are in our co-creative form is limitless. I use the word co-creation as the most palatable term in corporate to be able to talk about faith openly. It's like that too is a voodoo subject. And it's kind of like, that's just got to stop. You know, we will not be able to solve those new world problems that are happening. They're not about to happen. They are happening from the same thinking that created them, as I said before. And the only way that that is going to be addressed, in my mind, is evolving the consciousness of those who lead. And that will not happen. I gave up being a human being a long time ago. It's all too friggin' hard there. You know, co-creation is the ability to tap into the unknown dimension. Spirituality for me is about trusting the unknown as much as the known. Now, if you are unable to talk about faith or talk about love in the context of business, that to me is a massive deficit. And I don't understand why globally it's only now, because of COVID, that people are forced to realize how disassociated they are from their feelings. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how we transition from what has been that whole masculine traditional model into, I mean, I believe I've trained all my life for what's about to occur, because I believe autonomous leadership and co-creative leadership are critical leadership modalities that are needed within the workforce or within the leadership
Absolutely.
marketplace.
So, you know, we have had a male-driven world, but it's a fact that we all embody masculinity and femininity within each of us, right? The yin and the yang coexists. Each of us within us have the ability to set goals and strive for success and deliver results. That's the masculinity side of us. And the femininity side of us is to be able to be kind and loving and nurturing and sustaining. A great movie that depicts the need for both to coexist is the movie A Few Good Men.
Yep.
With Demi Moore and Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise, in that movie, Demi Moore is the only woman. I actually used this for case studies for my clients and in my classroom. She's the only woman and she's always dressed in white. There is a lot of symbolism in that movie if we go behind the scenes. And Tom Cruise, in his masculinity, had everything that was capable of driving the proper outcome, but he didn't care enough. It was when the femininity pushed him, the femininity challenged him together, the masculinity and the femininity coming together is what was able to equitably solve the problem at hand.
Mm.
And I normally have leaders watch that as a movie, as a pre-read. They don't need to read. They can watch a movie with their families. And then we use the movie as a case study.
Yeah.
Then it becomes less threatening and they don't have to feel vulnerable that we're truly taking a workplace situation. It's a movie, right?
Mm.
Art imitating life. And we have created a world where the masculinity has been at the leadership, and any woman who breaks through the ranks has to appear in that masculinity in order to be taken seriously.
Mm.
When a man asks questions, he is being insightful. When a woman asks questions, she's being too nosy, right? So we have all these different definitions. A woman who's confident is arrogant and cocky. If a man is confident, oh my God, he's such a good leader. So we have to break ourselves of these habits. And having been a woman leader in a man's world, I have realized that I have to meet them where they are, but I get to break those habits with humor.
Mm.
And break them I will, and I have. And everybody is coachable, provided we do it in a non-threatening way.
Mm.
I remember one of my very first budget meetings as a 32-year-old CFO for a Fortune 100 company. We took a bathroom break and all the men are in the men's room talking business. You know, in the United States, walls are thin. You can stand in the hallway and hear. So me being me, I knocked and they're like, yes. I said, since you're continuing to talk business, I'm going to come in. If you need toilet paper, let me know. I can bring that from the ladies' room. They were freaked out, right? Because I say things that are so off the wall, they would have actually walk in. But doing things like this repeatedly broke their habit, right?
Mm.
So how do we make sure that we're breaking them of their habits and also coaching them? And how are we giving permission to women to embrace their femininity? Because kindness is considered a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Love is such a singularly dimensioned word in English. In every other language, there are different words for love.
Mm. Mm.
So it's hard for people to grasp the word love in a work context when it's used in English.
True. Well, I think the whole issue of transparency, that was an interesting statistic. I think that was 74%, that there was a requirement to have greater transparency within the culture. That in itself, whenever I've worked with leadership development teams, I have them present in front of each other, the CEO, all of the executive, open kimono, because most of them don't know each other. Now, if I'm working on the executive, because one person in isolation is one thing, a collective is another. So if you don't even know who you're working with, business is personal. So the good, the bad, and the indifferent. And so I would critique each of their presentations to ensure that it was as transparent as you could possibly get it, and then present it in front. Even just them presenting was hilarious. Because as a leader, it's important that you are able to articulate, who you are and what you do. And but the bond that was established once everybody had done open kimono in front of each other. Now, you can't tell me that they're not going to be a far more effective team once they can see the good, the bad, and the ugly in each other, and actually have more compassion and understanding, and be blown away by some of the stories of who they're working with at that level. Something like KPIs blow my mind. To this day, in every single organization on the planet, these KPIs are introduced, key performance indicators, specifically on more so their sales side of things. I talk about KPI disempowered cultures and KPI empowered cultures. Day in, day out, people are under extreme stress because of the bottom line to be able to perform. Yet we're not giving the people at the most senior level tools in their toolkit on how to deal with their own performance anxiety, the pressure is more paramount now than it ever has been. So I'm going, what's the point? You talk about bottom line. What's the point of having a KPI in the organization unless it's met? The whole cultural dynamic is that they're hardly ever met, and then we just keep doing.
Mm-hmm.
So being leadership versus doing leadership. and introducing integrity around your spoken word. When you become count honorable to your word, which is never honored within most executive environments, which is why it's then allowed that KPIs aren't met, and then obviously then that has an impact on the bottom line. But it's absolutely freaking ludicrous that these KPIs are continued to be reintroduced, given that I believe that is one of the biggest systemic issues as far as mental health is concerned on every layering within the organization, because it's always linked to the bottom line. To me, the transformation of the bottom line is transforming the psyche of the individual, whether that's the CEO, the executive team, or the people within the organization. We are continuing in organizations globally, governments globally. I mean, even something just like succession planning, that ain't a novel concept. But you name me one country in the world where there are viable candidates to vote for when election time comes around. Pretty much every country is not dealing with the succession planning of bringing viable leaders through. I mean, there's so many things that are so obvious from my perspective, and I'm just going, it's probably like in New Zealand, we have huge road issues or transport issues. Well, a leader 20 years ago didn't make the decisions that should have been made, and now we're dealing with the issues from a transportation standpoint that really should have been addressed 20, 30 years ago. That type of thing with reference to there's some key things that need to change, otherwise doing the same thing ain't going to get a different result. And my concern for the future generations is that this thinking is not going to be able to solve those new world problems.
Very much so. We have constructed a world where thinking and doing, so the brain and body have been engaged, the heart and the feeling have been disengaged. So when I work with executives, yes, I am in the finance world, I'm doing mergers and acquisitions and economic development, but all of that finance is a behavioral science. People forget that financial economic outcomes are behavioral outcomes. That means I have to integrate psychology, economics, accounting, and how the culture and the language comes together to create that outcome is all necessary. And so what I do is I tell them to share their thoughts on what successful leadership for them right now looks like, not in words. I take crayons and colored pencils, and I have everybody
God,
draw.
I love you. I love you. Yeah.
So the immediate reaction I get is, you want us to do what? I said, draw. I don't want a word. I'm going to give you 15 to 20 minutes. Each of you are going to draw a picture of what leadership feels like to you today. And then we're going to go around the table and each of you are going to explain your pictures. It is amazing how when they are forced to turn off the brain and draw, feelings come in. It's the same therapeutic methodology people use to talk to children who are requiring to be healed, right? So we're still human. Our psychological framework is set when we are 5. We're just those children in adult bodies. Research shows that 20% of our world is certifiably insane. Some of them lead organizations, some of them we work with, some of them are making decisions for our countries, right? So in order to tap into that, we can't function from a place of thinking and talking. So I pivot them to drawing and feeling, and then allowing that feeling to be expressed. And it's amazing how immediately everybody starts showing up as different people. And yes, every one of the leadership workshops I do starts with white paper and crayons.
Well, that segues nicely into, I specialize in what I term the default identity. I feel as though I've cracked the code on what hinders human beings to sustain change. So if we are to, when you think of organizations, every single organization on the planet has human beings in it. If we are to entertain that every single human being in that organization has what I term a default identity, a bit like a fingerprint, Everybody has different upbringings. Everything stems from childhood. I didn't design it, people. That's what I say to CEOs when I go, why? When I've come to see you about my business, are you talking to me about my childhood? Everything stems from childhood, as we know. And we have a lot of little boys, little girls running businesses. So I've created this default DNA blueprint. And I believe every counselor, every psychiatrist on the planet needs to gain access to this education. I'd love to see it in the schooling system, because the power of awareness-based training, when you are aware of your own nuances of how you think, how you feel, how you do, why you do certain things, because moment by moment by moment, we're in one of two states. We're either in an empowered state or a disempowered state. Most of the education curriculums on the planet teach you how to manage your disempowered state, coordinate yourself around your disempowered state, even master your disempowered state. In co-creative leadership or equanimous leadership, part of what is advocated is that we die to the disempowered state, the default identity. It's a physical death, it's a metamorphosis, so that the new default becomes your empowered state. So can you imagine if we had executive teams around the world that knew how to maintain an empowered state, which is why the word equanimity for me is most primary. The ability to be the observer of what is, not how it could have been, should have been, wanted it to be, which is needed now more than ever with reference to the plethora of things that leaders are facing. There is not enough education on the default identity, which to me is the kicker to being able to sustain change. So working with people who are highly trained, that have tried everything, the Anthony Robbins, the avatars, the landmarks, and so forth, they're my target market, because you are the people that are going to make the change. We need you to, knowledge is redundant unless you apply it. My kicker is knowledge is redundant unless you apply it beyond the default identity. And if you don't even know you got one, how on earth can you do that? So I feel as I'm sitting here with this, world-class education that's taken a lifetime to, but then when you look around the world, it's really interesting to see that there is a timing of things. And I believe the timing is soon coming, because we can't continue to do the same thing.
Yes, and circumstances are forcing organizations to embrace it, because pre-COVID organizations were never ready to. I had an international client. I would say they were Fortune 50 company. The CFO grew up in a household where the mother accused the father of cheating the whole time, and the children grew up believing that. And as the parents aged and at their passing, they realized that the mother was unreasonably suspicious of the father and ruined the entire family's life. And the father never cheated on the mother. Okay. So fast forward, the children don't have a trusted relationship with each other. And this female CFO never trusts another female, but she doesn't know that. Fast forward, she becomes a new CFO. She hires an entire women's team because she wants to be known as this woman who gave the opportunity for her succession plan to be all women. But she could not get along with any one person. And here I am taking care of what needed to get taken care of in my consultation capacity. And this woman would start bringing her direct reports into her office, and everybody was set up like a fishbowl. So the perimeter was glass offices, but they were glass because you needed to let the light in the people in the middle of the office, right? And she would belittle them and yell at them, and they will be crying, and everybody can see. This is detrimental to everybody, and everybody was terrified of her. And I would, the minute it escalated, I would knock on the door, I would walk in, and I would de-escalate. While I was there to do my financial work, I can't do what I need to do if the leadership is disruptive. And the head of HR watching all of this actually talked me into taking on a full-time role because they wanted to give me the authority to fix the problem. But when we tried to fix the problem, and the organizational decision was to bring an outside consulting firm, the decision recommended and taken up by the C-suite is that everybody who will ever end up working for this woman is going to go through an industrial psych evaluation to make sure that their mental stability is so strong that the woman can't break them. And then everybody was told to use a safe word to trigger a change of behavior in her. And everybody had to go in and break the bad news to her and be abused so that the rest of the world doesn't see her abusive behavior.
Yep.
Now think about that. That was the conscious decision a C-suite made, and that was a conscious recommendation a world-class leadership firm made.
Mm. Mm. Well, there's a lot of mummy daddy issues out there. You know, if you're not complete with your mother or father, they're your primary male or female role model, you're going to have huge issues with that particular gender within the first workforce. It's not rocket science. Every addiction that any senior executive has can be stemmed back to childhood. Any inner critic dialogue, you know, I was on a 60-minute documentary and I had a high-powered barrister come and see me for a free consultation after it. And I said, you know, what was it that had you get in front of me? He said, I've had a heinous inner critic for over 50 years and I can't turn it off. And we had a short conversation and he didn't engage. He was too terrified to think of what life would be like if he didn't have this destructive mechanism, and he didn't believe that it could be possible. Training leaders on, I had a highly trained elite athlete once who had the most heinous inner critic. And he said, I don't want to lose my inner critic. I don't want to silence my inner critic. It's why I am as elite as I am and why I'm as good as I am at my sport. And I said, yeah, but great that you've been able to turn something so destructive into something beneficial. However, there is another way. And that is, you know, part of what I teach is silencing one's inner critic. If you were to just have silencing the inner critic in the schooling system, just that on its own, and having that as important as maths or science or whatever, that would change the complete human psyche on the planet. When I used to run my 3-day leadership retreats, 10 months of the year for 10 years, I used to have a semicircle or C-suite. I would say, write down your top 5 inner critic statements. And they're all heinous statements. Okay, now share them with the group. Now, people don't go, how's your inner critic today? What's your inner critic saying today? Nobody talks about it. It annihilates human potential. It's rife in no leadership training. And if there was, you know, one thing in leadership training is around this freaking thing called the inner critic, which is it was what I specialize in because of how systemic it is. And all of that stems from childhood. And nobody's talking about it. And yet that's annihilating their ability to perform. And regardless of how, you know, even those that do perform still have a powerful inner critic. So, you know, whether they're doing good or whether they're not, it's still having a huge impact on their performance, which has a direct correlation to the bottom line. And yet nobody's talking about it in these so-called leadership development plans. And my biggest bugbear, sorry, I'm on my freaking platform right now, is the same freaking training, the same freaking providers, you know, that surface level, off the shelf, that's not making any tippany of change, but the millions of dollars. There are a lot of people out there making a load of money that are delivering, you know, it's certainly you might go out there and get motivated, but as far as those people coming back into the environment and then being able to sustain the change for it to be beneficial to the culture, please, come on.
But it's companies do that as a tick the box exercise to say we've done it, right? And it shows up in the way that good, empowered, healed workers get off the treadmill.
Yep.
They get off the treadmill and go figure out what they want to do. The same reason you and I don't work in the corporate space. We got off the treadmill and we do our own thing. And we have Joe here, the perfect person to interject some light into why are people leaving the traditional organizations in droves? And when the organizations fail, society fails, because we do need institutions. How do we learn from the mistakes and fix behavior so that we can have viable institutions? Because without viable institutions, we do not have a functional society. Would love to hear your thoughts, Joe. Are you there, Joe? We can't hear him. Okay, while we wait for him, do you have any thoughts on that, Maria? I see Maria Rodriguez. Okay,
Quiet
Sally.
enough.
Go ahead. Maybe they're not ready to speak up. Go ahead.
Part of what I wanted to talk about today is what I always work in threes. What is required to, and I really respect your opinion and your viewpoint, because it's all very well to talk about it, but what's required. And specifically in the mental health perspective, as far as senior executives are concerned, anything new that's ever introduced into a culture, usually is off the back of some level of adversity. So I'd love to brainstorm with you, just from our perspective, what would be the three main things from our perspective on what would be required to, like they have these G8 summits, they have these, climate change summits, and I'm going, that's a load of money to bring everybody together. But from a follow-through perspective, and even the what are they, the 17 sustainability goals in the United Nations, they sound fantastic. They do, they really do. But and again, no discrediting for the great work that is being done. But between you and I today, I'd love to brainstorm what we think would be the three main things that would be required to move us from where we are today to where we need to be. Not like it's right or wrong, but I have huge concern and climate change is a really good example. It's not like we don't know that we need to do something, but there's such a level of disassociation with our arrogance as human beings that we can continue to destroy the planet at the rate that we are. I saw something the other day on Facebook saying that by the year 2050, there'll be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Baby.
Then we have to learn to eat plastic. There is no more fish, right? It's hard so I think in visuals, I think and read in languages other than English. So I feel that there is power in using a non-colonial language, because that allows us to think in ways that the colonial masters didn't want us to think. Okay, because English is such a two-dimensional language and it creates so much conflict. Simple things like, well, we're told the Europeans were pilgrims. Well, if somebody came into my country and raped the women and stole the stuff and gave infected blankets to kill my people, they're not called pilgrims. There's another name for it, right? So I dissociate from the colonial language and think in much older languages that had a different perspective. And as I'm thinking about it, Rumi, a poet from the Middle East, talks about it beautifully. We are not a drop in the ocean. We are each the entire ocean in one drop. So imagine what he's talking about is our soul contains all the energy that the universe embodies. So it's within us to be able to honor the universe that resides within us. To me, creating that awareness in people and unleashing the power of that realization is the key to everything. Because the Western world, the English-speaking world, looks at things in terms of good or bad, profit or loss, heaven or hell, right? Even gender is binary. And I always jokingly say, the only place where binary logic belongs in programming your computer, okay? Machine level language is binary. Gender, if you go to the pre-Gregorian calendar world, gender was never binary. Go look at every Hindu temple, what we call a Koburam, that entire steeple of the temple, which is like 20, 30 feet high. Every stage of humanity is depicted, and there you will see through art, gender is not binary. Sexuality is not even restricted to humans, okay? So that's the history of mankind. If we take things from where they truly are and accept the reality and not start putting things in boxes, and we give permission to people to truly embrace who they are and see inward, And that means you have to touch the feeling realm, because you can't function in the thinking and doing. When I do coaching, I tie the emotional intelligence and the childhood trauma and help the person get past that thinking and doing or being paralyzed to how do you tap into all of this? Everybody goes into the place where they went as a child as an escape. So some people can only think and not do. Some people can only feel and can't think about what they're feeling. Some people can only act without thinking or feeling because they have to numb themselves in thought and in feelings, right? So the visual I have is, say you and I are explorers, we're walking through Siberia, the storm came. We have the knowledge to know that if I build an igloo, I'm going to be okay because the temperature is going to be 32. We'll survive the storm, and then once the storm passes on, we can continue our expedition. So we get in there, we're talking about all these workshops we're going to do and how we're going to transform leadership and unleash the full leadership potential. But as we are talking, we're breathing. And every breath we take is condensing and making that igloo smaller. The longer we stay in there, it becomes our grave. So what I help people realize is what felt safe for you and the way you found escape in your initial trauma, your core trauma, your seminal trauma, is becoming your grave. You don't need to share with me what that is, but for your own sake, break out of it, because your family life, your human relationships, your work life, your societal life, everything is harmed by it because you keep going back to that place. And what worked for you as a child is not going to work for you as an adult. And you are the root at your own destruction. And when we have that conversation, 9 out of 10 times, it starts with complete emotional breakdown, talking about it, and then the healing begins, right? But creating that one-on-one safe place through storytelling, that's one way. There are other ways to do it, but getting at that is important, because if we don't rip the Band-Aid off and give the opportunity for air to heal, we're never disinfecting. We are having infected people walking around.
Yeah, which is why there needs to be more awareness-based training, I believe, in what I term the default identity, so that you understand. I mean, people can be very, very effective even in the face of their dysfunction. But what could be possible if we had more healed people on the planet, which is part of the discussion we're having today, especially at the most senior level, because you have a responsibility, because you are across a lot of people.
And it's also helping people realize life is complex, change is complex. And so doing one thing is not going to give us an outcome. And the reason why big picture issues never work out is because everybody has to do something. And the collective outcome of what everybody is responsible for is our shared destiny. So our responsibility may be individual, our accountability may be individual, but our prosperity is shared. So in the change management world, we call it complex adaptive theory. The best example I can give you is the Yellowstone National Park in the United States had been overrun by deer. The trees and the vegetation were destroyed because the deer was grazing everywhere, and the rivers dried and there was no water. And they were wondering, what can we do to change this? And having a deer hunting season to hunt the deers was not enough. So somebody suggested, let's introduce a wolf pack. By introducing a wolf pack, what happened is the wolf, as the natural predator of the deer, started hunting the weakest deers. And the rest of the deer moved to certain pockets to pasture. Then vegetation was able to grow in places the wolves were. And the plants came, all the other animals came, the rivers came, and all the animals that eat on the trees and break down the trees and fertilize the ground, all of the entire ecosystem came back. So I always ask the question, in this complex adaptive environment, what is akin to introducing the wolf pack, and let's do that one thing, but then let's give the time for the entire sequential complex evolution to take place. Because too often we pull the plug quick.
Mm. I don't know whether you've seen Oprah's doing a series, and she interviewed a guy recently. Can't remember his last name, but his first name is Emmanuel, and he entitles his documentary series on having the difficult conversations around racism, and interviewing a cross section of white people from every different race, creed, color about their view on racism. So my point of raising that is having the difficult conversations, because it's a difficult conversation to change status quo. And what comes with that territory is uncomfortability, resistance, and confrontation, which is what I teach every day, because transformation can only be accessed through those three emotions. So I think more awareness through discussion, specifically around mental health, not just for society in general, not just for the employee base. The focus point for me is at that high-end sector, because Houston, we have a problem and it's not being addressed, and there needs to be some catalytic change to be able to provide support. I feel for our politicians, I feel for our high-end CEOs, I feel for, you know, our military leaders, because it's unprecedented times.
Very much so. And because they are unable to trust and talk, they're
Yeah.
making decisions in a vacuum. And then they're blamed for that because they are solely accountable. But making a decision is different from having an outcome come to life through a complex adaptive process. So
that wolf story is just outstanding.
So it's a matter of creating that awareness for leaders, creating that peer support system for the leaders, and then going into the communities that they lead and educating the people on why they each need to do their part. Because if they don't do their part, they're undoing what the leadership is doing. And when two people have equal opposite actions, then the net result is no movement. And everybody is quick to blame. Everybody is quick to blame, and everybody is quick to blame the arrow, not the person who threaded the arrow onto the bow and let it go, right?
Very true. Very true. So, Kasturi Henry, I just
Go ahead.
I'd just love to see healing in however that's interpreted, like the so-called soft skills, which aren't soft. There's more
They're human
palatability.
skills. To
The human
me, they're
skills.
human
Yep.
skills.
Yep. That there's more palatability to being in the inquiry about introducing healing as a critical component to these leadership development plans moving forward for those at the highest level. It takes something to look at yourself. It takes something to look at yourself ongoingly. I mean, I'm 57 this year, and I've probably done 40 years of healing. Name a modality, I've done it. But I continue to do it. Obviously, my life apprenticeship has been different from most, but I also believe that that tenure of experiencing such a cross-section of modalities is part of me being able to teach people on truly understanding the power of healing, why it is so important, how one can introduce it. It is important to find the right practitioner with the right modality. And if people aren't educated in healing, they can have a bad experience, like they do with coaching or with management consultants. You know, there are a lot of people who have been burnt by people out there. So I understand that as well. But it would be absolutely life transforming to see healing be adopted in leadership development plans.
And ultimately, it comes down to, as human beings, we all need kindness. And we can't receive something we can't give. Because if everybody is asking for kindness and nobody is putting it, to me, it's like everybody wants beef stew, but nobody is putting the beef in the pot.
Mm.
There is no beef stew. You get vegetable stew. You get some stew, but it's not beef stew, right?
Yeah.
So how do we create an environment where people understand I need to be kind first?
Mm.
Because I can't expect kindness if I can't give kindness. And I also realize when I am able to give kindness, I need to have it for me first.
Mm.
When I'm kind to me, then I can give what I have extra to others. If I don't have a jar of sugar and I don't have sugar at all, I can't give my neighbor sugar, right?
Yep.
So how do I get it for myself? And how do I use it to heal me? Because kindness heals me first. How do I self-heal with my own kindness? And then how do I share my surplus to help my surroundings heal? Because then I'm creating an environment that is conducive for co-creation. An environment devoid of kindness is devoid of trust. And when there is no kindness and trust, there is no opportunity for a co-creation.
Which is why, just in closing today, faith and love is the solution. You know, everything stems from that. Everybody wants that. I respect, I mean, I've coached everybody from every religious sect, spiritual sect, atheist sect. I respect what each individual person believes, so long as we are able to leverage it and co-create with it. That to me is the solution, because it's not going to come from the limited human mind. And I think as a collective, if there were more people who were leveraging their co-creative ability, I mean, I was wanting to hold a summit here in New Zealand. New Zealand is a beautiful place on the planet from a spiritual standpoint. And to actually hold like an equivalent of a G8 summit with some of the top leaders around the world, but for the majority of the summit in the early stages to be in silence. What we can tap into as a collective in the silence of those that are willing to actually listen, I think would be formidable.
That's an interesting point, because some cultures don't understand silence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Some cultures refuse to understand silence. They refuse to allow a pause.
Mm.
And so how do we make it okay?
Mm.
How do we make it okay? Because if we don't stand still, we don't hear all of the things that's going around us that we normally don't pay attention.
Very true.
And we forget that when I say I am larger than this body.
You bet.
I am larger than this body. And when I say I, it is my soul. It is the energy that resides within this body. And am I paying attention to that inner me, my spirit, my soul, the energy, my divine? The single most important relationship each of us will ever have in our lifetime is with the divine within. If I can help everybody see that divine within, connect with that divine within, and honor that divine within, then everything else will flow from it, because that is the wellspring of the being.
What a powerful way to end. So the God in me acknowledges the God in you. Thank you for the opportunity to dance in conversation with you today.
Thank you so much, Sally. And for those of you who have been a part of this conversation live, or as you listen to this, we invite you to chime in and share your thoughts, because the world we need to see change is only going to happen because each of us took the time and invested the effort to connect with our divine within and engage with each other to honor the divine within each of us. So go
Beautiful.
out there and transform the world around you. And in that process, take a moment every day to pause and transform yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you, my friend.